Good morning, it's Dave Neal, stand-up comic and host of Bachelor Nation News. How's everyone doing out there? You having a good Friday, I hope? Well, I've got my, I got 3/4 of a tank of cold brew Dunkin's left, so that'll get us a pretty fun morning. And a fun conversation we're about to have regarding Madi Prewett and her take on the upcoming election. Did you know there's an election in 11 days? Aren't we all excited for it to be over? Could it be the shift and start of a whole new world we live in? Well, I'll tell you what. It's going to get interesting if it hasn't already. And they always talk about an October surprise, that being that something happens right before the election that could sway it in one way versus the other. Could Madi Prewett be responsible for that? No, not at all. Her take is interesting. I'm going to offer my response. And there'll be people that leave comments that say, "Oh, Dave, you have a political opinion. I'm unsubscribing." To that I say, you don't have to watch this. You can just move on. There's a lot of other great content. In fact, I did the She's All Batch podcast, and we didn't even talk politics. So you can go over to her YouTube channel and check that out if you would like. Although I did make a couple bold claims on that episode as well. So all I offer you, the only currency I've got, Dave Bucks, is the ability for me to share my opinion. If you would like to respond with your opinion, I'm reopening the voicemail line. 401-558-7841. It's a new phone number. I just got it. I'm going to be going through some voicemails on today's podcast, The Rush Hour. So if you call in and you want to hear your thoughts and maybe my response, scan that QR code. Now, what's the big deal? Madi has a take. Well, there's no big deal. She's got a pretty large platform, millions really. And I think the take's ridiculous. So I'm going to read hers and then I'll give my response. Sounds fair, right? We live in that kind of country where you can just do that, right? So here she says, "This is your friendly reminder to vote." Oh my gosh, how could she say that? No, I agree with her. Yes, vote. Doing a whole podcast on faith and politics next week, and I can't wait. Just overheard a lady saying her vote doesn't matter. Your vote matters and your prayers matter. You should be doing both. Choosing to not vote is a sin of omission and negligence. Now, I wouldn't tell people to pray, although I am the praying type. I pray to a God. It might be a different God than other people have, and it might be adjacent to my Catholic upbringing. It might sound foreign to an evangelical or a Muslim. I don't know. I don't have it all figured out. I believe we're all connected through some sort of source material, which is love. Some people call it Allah, Buddha, Krishna, God, Yahweh, Jesus, Taylor Swift. I don't know what you want to call it. Sure as hell isn't a political leader, though. And I can tell you right now, Kamala Harris is no God, and Donald Trump is no God either. What I'm going to say in response to what Madi says here will not be a full bootlicking of the Democratic Party. I've got plenty of grievances against the Democratic Party. I've made it known who I'm voting for. I'm voting for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. It's very obvious. I'm a progressive, and they more closely align with what I'm looking for, which is to raise the basement of what we like, where we exist in society, which means I would rather have Medicare for all, a better basic income, and some regulations that protect workers. That's what I would like. And as far as a lot of the culture war battles, I don't fight them because the president isn't necessarily the person who we vote for when it comes to some of the issues and debates that are going on right there. You can work those out in your sort of local elections, right? So anyhow, let's go to what Madi said that really ruffled feathers. And then again, I'll continue to share my point. It's up to you right now. I'll say this. Part of the way I live life, and I have to remind myself this daily. And if I have too much sugar, I become reactive and maybe get anxiety. If I don't sleep enough, I can be reactive and get anxiety or lash out or not be the version of me I want to be. But every day I try to lead my life by not giving someone else the power of my reaction. And by that, I mean, if you get really triggered by words that I'm saying here, look at why that triggers you. I understand talking about religion and talking about politics can be very triggering. I'm just going to ask you to look a little deeper than getting mad at the sort of guy you see on the screen and think, why does this bother me so much? Has everything I've been taught been wrong? Maybe, maybe not. Madi said, and while we're on the topic, please, when you vote, vote on the policies and not the person. You're not choosing a spouse or a pastor. It's not a Valentine. The policies enforced will impact you and your children. This isn't about politics. This is biblical. Okay, so who you vote for is not about politics. First of all, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard anyone say. Freedom of religion is at stake here. That's the second most ridiculous thing I've ever heard someone say, among a lot of other things. And mass media has made this election a superficial thing where we focus on the personality, gender, and character of a person. I guess character is, this is what's wild to me, that somebody who is a evangelical influencer would say that voting on the president's character is superficial. I'm not mincing words, and I'm not putting words in her mouth. She literally says that right here. We should be looking at policies that will impact God's design for family, marriage, and children, and which candidate will promote more God and bring this nation back to a nation under God. You know, I've got family members that are devout Catholic. And when you're Catholic and you say you're a devout Catholic, I mean, there aren't many instances where you say you're devout anything. Like no one's like, oh, Dave, he makes podcasts every day. He's a devout podcaster. Although I would say Dave Neal, devout podcaster, that kind of looks pretty good. That would slap pretty nice on a t-shirt. So my issue here is a lot of the hypocrisies that exist with what she's saying. So let's break them down. The idea that we're focusing on policies and not the person. I would ask her, which policies, cool, let's start here. Let's assume she's voting for Donald Trump. I think that's very clear. She's been to MAGA events. She's clearly, a conservative, which is, conservatism is tangled in the evangelical movement because there's a lot of like Christian values and, whatever, which I think we should untangle them. I think we should be able to untangle who we get down on our knees and pray to and who we vote for what's best for the country. I think the separation of church and state is a good thing because while, yes, the majority of our country are Christians, there are plenty of other religions. There's the Jewish faith, like I said, Muslims, there's plenty of Arab. There's so many other cultures that don't pray to the same God. And I have no problem saying, hey, we all deserve and should value our faith if we have that. And we should also respect those that don't. And that's fine too. That's the most Christian thing you could do, right? And when it comes down to what's Christian and what's not, I look at Jesus Christ. I look at, he was one of the first influencers. He had 12 followers, right? 11 at one point, but I think he won them back. You see what I did there? Does Mary count as an influencer? Oh boy, she was a groupie, really. Okay, I'm not trying to besmirch the good name of Jesus. I'm here to say, I've made this case before and I would make it again, that if Jesus were alive right now, he would probably be a social, some form of a social democrat, someone that wants to give to the poor and wants to go into the marketplace and see people that are using God's name to make money and flip tables and say, this is disgusting what you're doing. Faith should not be monetized. So anyhow, when you talk about the policies and not the person, when you say, what's at stake here, and when you talk about the superficiality of personality and gender, I'm sorry. I'll be quite honest. I haven't given it two thoughts that Kamala would be the first female president. I have not given that two thoughts. But it's no surprise that a lot of people are putting a lot of cultural weight into what's going on. And they say, well, are you more happy now than how you were 4 years ago? And my response to that is, the economy has thrived more often with Democratic presidents, with Democratic policies. And the Democratic Party, I believe, is less focused on a cultural leader. Cult is short for cultural. Is the MAGA movement a cult? No, in the sense that no one's telling people to stay. No one's telling you to disavow your family. There are aspects of politics that are cultish. And this goes on both sides. I'm willing to admit so many things that are wrong about the Democratic Party. They didn't do a good job they were not honest, like the leaders with when Hillary Clinton was running for office, Bernie Sanders, there was definitely voter manipulation, not voter fraud, but manipulation in the sense that they, already had their super delegates lined up for Hillary when the fair process was showing a lot of movement towards Bernie. In the 2020 election, when Bernie was winning the early primaries, you saw Buttigieg, you saw Kamala Harris, you saw Amy Klobuchar, you saw all the other primary contenders drop out and then immediately support Joe Biden. I think that there is collusion that happens, but that is not voter fraud. Okay, so I'm not here to say that the election wasn't fair on a voter standpoint. I'm saying the powers that be kind of control and strangle who they want to be in the office. And with that said, this election cycle, the biggest issue that a lot of Republicans have is they say, you claim that Trump's going to steal the democracy and end democracy, but you guys appointed Kamala Harris as the nominee. And look, I don't disagree. Biden should have been looked at very critically 2 years ago, and the moves should have been made 2 years ago to say we need a robust primary to decide who's going to be our next candidate for office. Now, of course, the powers that be that were working with Biden, and by the way, I don't think he has dementia. I think he's slowing down in his age. His policies have been good for the country. Joe Biden, now we could talk about the immigration issue. There's a lot to talk about in a short video here, but I'm going to stick more on this idea of what Maddie talks about being a cult of personality and policies. Joe Biden's CHIPS Act provided a hell of a lot of new jobs and technology back into the United States in a time where there will be a sort of economic war between who controls technology. So yes, inflation rose during the Biden presidency, but it also rose across the world. And you have to look at these types of things. You have to look at them and say, you know what? The U.S. actually has a rip-roaring economy right now. It's actually done better than other first world countries in the Western world with regards to the control of inflation and bringing it back down. Now, there's corporate inflation, which is really corporate greed that is going on that needs to be handled. But that is different than the inflation of like the dollar per se. So this idea that Trump had a rip-roaring economy, sure. I mean, he rode a wave that 8 years of Obama created. And the same thing happened where Clinton, to Bush, Bush, whatever. So these are the objectionable facts as far as I know them. You could provide different facts. The reason I'm not pulling up anything, because that becomes one of those confirmation bias where I pull up an article, then you pull up an article, and it just becomes annoying. So when she talks about looking at policies that will impact God's design for family, she doesn't really, I guess that's her way of scapegoating around what Trump has done. Trump is a salesman. He sells whatever the heck he can to fund whatever the hell he can. He sells Bibles printed in China after saying, we're giving all our money to China. He sells overpriced sneakers and $100,000 watches, and he sells crypto, Bitcoin, real gold, silver dollar, Trump imprinted. He is the embodiment of what evangelicals always said they were against. And it used to be if you coughed too loud into a microphone, your campaign was over. Now there is literally nothing that he can say or do that would really fracture his base. What is interesting to me is, hey, don't take my word for it. And now look, I'm not someone who was raised into money. I grew up squarely in the middle class, but when I was younger, my mom lived off of food stamps. She left my father when she was pregnant with me. He was a Vietnam vet who had PTSD, and he wasn't in the right headspace to be a father. So my mom had government assistance while she worked to get her degree. She's the embodiment of how the government can help elevate people to get back on their feet. The embodiment of that. And because of that, she now runs a company with her husband, my stepdad, where they employ several dozen people. So a little help to get everybody, into their entrepreneurial spirit is a good thing. And that's what social democracy is all about. It's about not just funding, the fire trucks, not just funding a war, but also funding each other and, taking care of each other. So look, I'm not going to read the comments. There'll always be somebody who has a response to everything. But for me, at the end of the day, I would hope my audience sees me as being authentic. I've been called a grifter. I've never tried to sell anybody on anything political or religion based. So there's no grifting from me. There's just my authentic opinion. And you could argue that it actually hurts my channel. There's so many spineless people that are afraid to share their true convictions because they don't want to damage their audience. And I'm not afraid to do that. I'm not afraid to lose somebody who doesn't value my opinion. Either respect my opinion or move on to someone else who will exist in your echo chamber. So anyway, she says don't vote for, and again, so basically all she cares about is someone who's pro-life. And Trump is actually not pro-life. Trump's pro-choice in the sense that he thinks there should be a time that you can get an abortion up until a certain amount of weeks. That's pro-choice. The actual hard-nosed pro-lifers don't like Trump's stance on this. He's always been that way since he was a Democrat. Now, does that mean he's not going to go for a full abortion ban? He says he wouldn't, but you have to take someone for their actions. And in the 4 years that he was president, he was very lucky that enough Supreme Court seats opened up that he was able to nominate people that would get rid of Roe v. Wade. The problem I have with that is when he elected these Supreme Court officials, justices, every single one of them was asked, will you overturn Roe v. Wade? And they all said, it's the law of the land. And of course, what's the first thing they did when they all got together? Overturn Roe v. Wade. Now, of course, I've interviewed people that have had to travel out of state, spend thousands of dollars to get abortions. And even if you are pro-life, abortions sometimes are classified even if the baby, the fetus has passed away. So sometimes, in some cases, people have died because they haven't been able to remove the fetus and pass the fetus after it's died. The leading cause of sepsis is in women who have, had that sad thing happen. So you hear about all these stories, including, I actually was going to share this on the Rush Hour podcast. You have over here, Chrissy Teigen's life-saving abortion at 20 weeks. She had to get a life-saving abortion. And you might say, no one should abort a baby at 20 weeks. The fetus had passed away. And in many cases, doctors in states where they don't have exceptions, or if it's a gray area, just decide not to abort a passed away fetus, and then the mom has to deal with the horrific. And in his case, she was bleeding out. My wife was miscarrying and bleeding out. Her life was in danger, and for the government to say, "Oh, we need to evaluate this to make sure you're sufficiently dying before we can give you an abortion," no, stay out of it. So you have all these issues that are hotbed issues, but they're way deeper. And when you press people on them, like if I were to actually sit down and have a very long conversation with Maddie here, I would say she's probably more pro-choice than she thinks. Because being pro-choice doesn't mean I'm going to have an abortion. It means you give the doctors the permission to do the tough thing. And that might be having an abortion to save the mother. That might be, deciding at what amount of weeks, you can. And by the way, most abortions are done with a pill, the abortion pill, not Plan B. It's an abortion pill, which is, done early on. But these states where, they have abortion bans after 6 weeks, most people don't even know they're pregnant by then. So anyhow, this idea that she has about voting for someone who will respect God's design for family, marriage, and children is so privileged, because what about providing health care? What about providing social safety nets and programs so that kids can have food before they go to school if they live in an impoverished community? Kamala Harris's VP running mate, Tim Walz, assigned I believe, bipartisan program to provide lunch and breakfast to kids. That's a social program. Everyone in that state said, you know what? We'll put a penny of our earnings into this, and collectively we can make sure no one goes to school flipping hungry. Isn't that God's design? That we take care of each other, and those that are less fortunate have a fighting shot when their brains are developing? Now, Maddie married a guy whose father's a billionaire. I'm sure he's a good person, but clearly they're not taxed at a substantial enough level to pay into these types of programs. Because I I personally believe it's very hard in today's world to become a billionaire without massive collateral damage. It's hard to have that sort of exchange of wealth. Now, it does happen. There are the Taylor Swifts that literally is a billionaire just because she sells a hell of a lot of tickets and people can decide if they want to use those tickets or not. But then there's also billionaires that come from, oligarchs, monopolies, programs where, there's price fixing or a company that's too big that they push out the little man like Amazon. Like Amazon, we all shop at Amazon, but Jeff Bezos, he's become a billionaire, but he's put a lot of people out of business in the process, So anyway, my point being, if you really want to talk about what God's design is, I think it's us learning to take care of each other, even if we have a different letter next to the political, in the election booth, even if it's a Democrat or Republican. I'm just gonna end and share several thoughts here, because if you don't want to take it from me, Trump said, and again, we have 4 years of what he said, right? He said, I'm going to drain the swamp. I'm going to bring in the best of the best, the brightest. That's what I'm going to do. What have the best of the best done? They have all disavowed Trump. Now, obviously, I'm sharing this from the Kamala headquarter page, but these are quotes from all the people that he brought in himself. Trump's Vice President Mike Pence. The American people deserve to know that President Trump asked me to put him over my oath to the Constitution. Anyone who puts himself over the Constitution should never be President of the United States. Trump's Secretary of Defense, James Mattis. Donald Trump is the first president in my lifetime who does not try to unite the American people, does not even pretend to try. Instead, he tries to divide us. Trump's Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper. I think he's unfit for office. He puts himself before country. His actions are all about him and not about the country. And then, of course, I believe he has integrity and character issues as well. And by the way, these aren't just random grifters. These, in some cases, are 4-star generals. People who have spent their whole entire life fighting in the military and defending the Constitution that sits beneath all of us, that we were all born and raised on. Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton. Trump is unfit to be president. Trump really cares only about retribution for himself. Yeah, so as was said before, this idea of who he's going to come after when he wins, let's go forward. That's my thought. And again, by the way, we'll have 4,000 or 12,000 people that watch this. If everybody who watched this was a swing state vote in a swing state, it wouldn't change the election. So it's kind of futile what I'm saying, but I feel like everyone needs to share their opinion. Trump's national security advisor, H.R. McMaster. We saw the absence of leadership, really anti-leadership, and what that can do to our country. Trump's attorney general, Bill Barr. And by the way, Bill Barr was a Trump bootlicker, someone who engaged in that kind of bullying about a process that is fundamental to our system, to our government, shouldn't be anywhere near the Oval Office. It goes on and on. Trump's chief of staff, John Kelly, a person that has nothing but contempt for our democratic institutions, our Constitution, and the rule of law. There is nothing more than can be said. God help us. Trump's acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney. I think he failed at being the president when we needed him to be that. Trump's top general, Mark Milley. No one has ever been a danger to this country as Donald Trump. He's a total fascist. Look at this, folks. Look, this is a decorated general, the top general, the United States, saying these types of things. Not running for office. Really, they're all going to get heat for saying it. Trump's Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. Okay, so I haven't even read what Rex said yet, but Rex was brought in from big oil. Wasn't he the CEO of an oil company, right? So he was brought in from the outside. What does he have to say? Trump's understanding of global events, his understanding of global history, his understanding of U.S. history was really limited. It's really hard to have a conversation with someone who doesn't even understand the concept for why we're talking about this. Trump's ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley. And now Nikki is a Trump bootlicker. She has, she said bad things about him. Now she's completely taken it back. It's just, we can never forget all of these bootlickers that have decided to stand by this guy when we know for a fact they don't believe that, including J.D. Vance. Republicans know what a disaster Donald Trump has been and will continue to be. They are just too afraid to say the truth out loud. Trump's Homeland Security Advisor, Tom Bossert. The president undermined American democracy baselessly for months. As a result, he's culpable for the siege and an utter disgrace. Trump's Secretary of the Navy, Richard Spencer. He has very little understanding of what it means to be in the military, to fight ethically, or to be governed by a uniform set of rules and practices. And again, as my father was fighting in Vietnam and ended up, having PTSD and Agent Orange on his death certificate when he died decades later. As my father was fighting in Vietnam, Trump was paying off a doctor to say that he had a foot issue. Doesn't even remember what foot it was. Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen. He's a complete and total danger to our democratic republic in every way, shape, and form. Trump's White House lawyer, Ty Cobb. He has never cared about America, its citizens, its future, or anything but himself. If he wins, the consequences will extinguish what remains of the American dream. Trump's Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, and she was a real wacko. When I saw what happened on January 6th and didn't see the president step in and do what he could have done to turn it back or slow it down or really address the situation, it was just obvious to me that I couldn't continue. Trump's press secretary, Stephanie Grisham. I don't think he is fit for the job. He's on a revenge tour. Trump's comm director, Anthony Scaramucci. He is the domestic terrorist of the 21st century. Trump's presidential transition chairman, Chris Christie. I'm not voting for Trump because I know him too well and he is wholly unfit to be president in every way you can think of. Top Trump aide Cassidy Hutchinson. I think that Donald Trump is the most grave threat we will face to our democracy in our lifetime and potentially in American history. It used to be that one of those people disavowing the former president would be enough to move the election. And we just live in a world right now where that's not the case. Will anyone flip their vote based on what I have to say here now? I have no idea, but I'd be remiss if I didn't share my opinion. That's what my channel is all about. Again, if anyone wants to call in, you can. I can't promise you I'll play your voicemail. If I get a lot of voicemails, I'll consider having a weekend episode of the Rush Hour podcast. So scan it here if you want to listen. And again, if you value someone's opinion that isn't bought and paid for, even if it's different than yours, hey, throw me a like, throw me a subscribe, and I'm on Patreon, patreon.com/Dave Neal. Our community is very largely supported by private memberships, patreon.com/Dave Neal, and I thank everyone who's been a part of the community. All right, there it is. Responded to Maddie's take. What do you think?